I would argue that perfect competition is the system we most often think of when we think of capitalism. It's defined as a system wherein a large number of firms are all producing the same good or service, and because of this, no one firm controls enough market share to have an impact on the price of the good. The only decisions made by the producer are how much they should produce based on their cost and the market price. Some farm products, the stock exchange, and commodities are examples of items that can be classified by perfect competition. A commodity is a good that is considered the same no matter who produces it, like milk or oil. The first condition that exists in perfect competition is that there are many buyers and sellers that participate in the market. Competition is fierce, and the quality of the product and the quality of the service are both likely taken into account by consumers. Secondly, all sellers offer identical products. There is no way for one firm to differentiate their product from that of another firm. Third, buyers and sellers are well informed about the products, the prices, quality, and production techniques. Finally, sellers are able to enter and exit the market freely. A barrier to entry is simply any factor that makes it difficult for a new firm to enter a market. In some market types, specifically perfect competition, you have already seen that buyers and sellers can enter and exit the market freely. Goods and services produced in this market type may be simple to produce and little to no government regulation may exist. If you want to open a photography business, you're free to do so. And the only barrier is the photography equipment and knowledge. Now compare that to an airline. Even a single plane operation has a large barrier, the plane. Not only does the plane represent a barrier to entry, but before you will be able to fly that plane commercially, you first have to obtain a pilot's license. Then you'll have to jump through all sorts of regulatory hoops to open your business. Even then, you're going to need access to a hangar, terminals wherever you fly, ticketing agents, mechanics, plane parts, etc. Even more arduous a task would be creating an electric company, which would involve an energy-producing plant, transmission lines, power trucks, line workers, underground cables, hookups, and on and on and on and on. Any startup costs, human and physical capital, and technology represent barriers to entry. The increased prominence of the internet since about the year 2000 has actually helped to tear down barriers in certain industries. For recording artists who prior to the internet had to create and send out demo tapes, rent out studios for recording sessions, and hope for a lot of good fortune in order to be picked up by a major label, new technology and the person-to-person nature of the internet has torn down the old barriers. Both iTunes and the reincarnated MySpace, as well as Spotify and other music services, have given independent artists access to markets they could not have reached in previous years. Amazon got to start selling ebooks on the Kindle and has grown into the gargantuan that it is today. But the benefits for independent authors are the real boon for crushing publishing barriers. In situations where the barriers to entry are so great that it's not just impractical, but impossible for competition, monopolies develop. Remember that the prefix mono means one, so there is just a single supplier that produces a unique product, sometimes for many, many consumers. Utilities, specifically electric companies, hold monopolies in their sector. Because the cost to create plants, transmission lines, substations, and other parts of the power grid are so incredibly high, there is no room for a competitor. In fact, one of the characteristics of a monopoly is that any competition would destroy any and all firms involved in that industry. This goes to the economic principle of economies of scale. If you were to produce a jar of mayonnaise, it wouldn't cost a significant amount of money to create the first jar. But you may have leftover supplies, or you may have worked out an efficient way to produce the mayonnaise, so creating a second unit would actually cost less than the first. As you continue producing units of mayonnaise, you'll end up buying a lot of your ingredients in bulk and making enough mayonnaise to fill many jars. Each unit produced costs less than the previous. The same thing happens in the energy sector. If you're Duke Energy or TECO, before you can sell your first kilowatt hour of energy, you'll need everything that we discussed earlier to produce the electricity and get it to the consumer. Plant, lines, linesmen, equipment, substations, overhead and underground lines, etc. The cost to do all of this is going to run in the billions. The first kilowatt hour of electricity is calculated by taking the overall cost of setting up the grid, plus the cost of producing the first kilowatt and dividing it by 1. The second kilowatt hour is calculated by taking the overall cost, plus the cost of producing the first and second kilowatts and dividing that number by 2. This goes on and on. Obviously, the company doesn't need to build an entirely new grid to produce the second kilowatt hour, so the overall cost of each unit of electricity drops every time a new unit is produced. For these reasons, any firm that claims 100% market share is heavily regulated by the government, whether it be the national government, the state, or local. Anytime that an electric company wants to increase their prices, it usually must be approved by a government agency or commission before the price increase can be put into place. Why does all of this matter to the consumer? In an environment of pure competition, firms must distinguish themselves in other ways besides what they produce. This can be done through customer service or experience. If a company is going to treat a customer badly in a pure competition environment, there is nothing stopping the consumer from taking their money somewhere else. But as the number of firms in a given sector decreases, their motivation to take customer satisfaction into account also decreases. Take a look at the list of companies who have been rated to have the worst customer service in the United States. What do you notice about them? What you should notice about that list is that every company is either in the telecommunications industry or banking. Banking does offer a lot of alternatives to the large national or multinational banks, often in the form of small local credit unions, but have you ever tried to close an account and open a new one somewhere else? It's not easy, especially since technology has become so prevalent. If you have an account at Bank of America, odds are that you have multiple bills that are paid automatically through that account. To change banks, you not only have to withdraw all of your money in the form of a cashier's check, but you also have to remember to identify and change all of those payments that are on auto pay and transfer them over to a new account. The large banks are betting that you won't go through all of the hassle to make the change. So they've created all sorts of fees and stipulations about what you can and can't do with your account, knowing full well that you likely won't pull your money. In many areas, cable companies hold monopolies, or their only competition is from much smaller firms who can't provide the level of product at the same price point. This is why you can get stuck on hold with Comcast customer service for 3+ hours. The only real surprise about this list is no airlines are on it. Governments may also hold monopoly rights on certain industries. In the state of Florida, the state itself is the only entity legally allowed to run a lottery. In the past, railroads, utilities, and telecoms could also have been run by the government. In the pharmaceutical industry, a company will invest nearly $2.5 billion to create one new drug. Once that drug is created, another company could reverse engineer that pharmaceutical and then begin producing the same drug at a fraction of the original company's cost. If this were to happen, there would be no incentive to create new pharmas because the price the original company would charge to compete against the other pharma would not cover the cost of research and development. Because of this, the government issues patents and copyrights. In the 1990s, the United States Department of Justice believed that Microsoft was becoming too big and crowding out smaller competitors from the marketplace. Read each of the articles about the government's antitrust suit against Microsoft. When phone lines went up across the country and homes were first wired for service, the copper wiring and the labor required to install it between homes and businesses was cost prohibitive, and it didn't make much sense to wire homes and businesses more than once. The government allowed AT&T to develop into a monopoly because creating competition was just too difficult. Prior to cell phones, most people had phones in their home that were known as landlines. If you were looking to make a call within a small region, say Tampa Bay, this was known as a local call. Local calls were included in your monthly phone bill. But if you wanted to call someone in, say, Orlando or Georgia, then you had to make what was known as a long distance call. For these, you would be charged extra, usually by the minute. By 1982, AT&T was in control of the local market, and they had also expanded into the long distance market. The government came along and broke up AT&T into 7 smaller companies that provided local service. These were Bell South, Pac Bell, Atlantic Bell, US West, NYNEX, Ameritech, and Southwestern Bell. These were known as the Baby Bells. AT&T continued to provide long-distance service, and these 7 other firms provided local telephone service in different regions. The Department of Justice apparently felt that a vertically integrated telephone company, one that provided local and long-distance service, was not required for productive efficiency, or that there were other offsetting gains from the divestiture. According to the Department of Justice, the vertical structure of the company provided an opportunity for unfair competition against other providers of long-distance service. For example, by charging high local rates or by providing poor local service to other providers of long-distance service, AT&T could harm long-distance competitors. Another concern of the Department of Justice was the difficulty of monitoring cost shifting among AT&T's regulated and other relatively unregulated businesses, such as its manufacture of telephones and other equipment. The resulting breakup of the telephone company presumably mitigated the government's concerns. Since 1984, the technology and industry structure have changed rapidly. The Baby Bells have all been reconsolidated with AT&T or purchased or merged with other telecoms. At this point in time, local telephone services are often packaged within cable and internet bundles provided by the local cable or internet service providers. AT&T moved into the cell phone market and, along with Verizon, holds a sizable market share within that industry. Oligopolies are similar to monopolies, but rather than having just one choice in the market, the consumer has a limited number of choices of companies who all supply the same good or service. Oligopolies, like monopolies, exist for a reason. The barriers to entry are high. Additionally, the firms that control the market may work together, but not in the open because that's collusion and that's illegal. They do this to keep new competitors out of the market. Unfair business practices among the airlines and telecoms are not unusual. In the past, they were pretty much the norm. Customer service normally suffers as well. Think about being trapped on a plane for 6 to 12 hours while taxiing. There's nothing you can do about it, and they don't care. Classic examples of oligopolies include cable television, entertainment options in music and film, airlines, pharmaceutical companies, computer companies like Dell, Asus, Acer, HP, and Apple, computer operating systems with your only options really being Windows, Mac OS, and to a much smaller extent Linux, and cell phone services, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile. The automobile industry is also an oligopoly. With all of the television options on cable television, it's actually a little hard to believe that media could be controlled by a small number of firms. But mergers and buyouts have produced just that. Let's take a look at Disney for an example. When you think about Disney, the first thing that pops into your mind is probably the theme parks at Disney World and Disneyland, or the animated films that you have undoubtedly watched as you've grown up. But do you know that Disney owns ESPN, the History Channel, National Geographic? During Bob Iger's tenure as the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, he turned away from his predecessor's work to strengthen Disney's existing properties and instead began focusing on bringing other intellectual properties into Disney's portfolio. Marvel, Pixar, Lucasfilm, which produced Star Wars and Indiana Jones, 20th Century Fox, and Hulu have all been purchased by Disney since 2000. This diversification means that in the event of a major recession, Disney will be better positioned to weather any losses from the Parks and Resorts division because their film production division is much stronger. Disney accounted for 40% of all receipts at the box office in 2019. And one of the sectors that normally does not feel the effects of recessions and depressions is the cinema. Disney has also positioned itself for the time when most people have cut their cable cord and moved to online content. They now own the majority share of Hulu, and they recently launched the Disney Plus service to go along with ESPN Plus. To ensure enough content for these streaming services, they also bought 20th Century Fox's film inventory. Nearly every other network on television, 90% of them, is owned by either Comcast, News Corp, Viacom, or Warner Media. Comcast is the parent of NBC Universal, News Corp is the parent of Fox, Viacom just recently merged with CBS, and Warner Media owns TBS and TNT. Any mergers between companies in an oligopoly are heavily scrutinized by the media, the public at large, and the government. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, an executive branch agency, is responsible for approving all mergers. T-Mobile and Sprint have sought a merger for more than 2 years as of this writing in 2020. But it has been held up in court as several states' attorneys general have tried to block the combination of the companies into one massive telecom. Their argument has been that reduced competition will lead to fewer choices, declining services, and higher prices. Monopolistic competition is a market structure in which many companies sell products that are similar but not identical. One of the best examples of this type of market is that of blue or denim jeans. Think about where you can buy and how much you can spend on jeans. It's possible to go to Walmart and spend as little as $10. It's also possible to head over to Neiman Marcus and plop down $10,000 for a pair of Escada's Couture Swarovski crystal jeans. Other industries involved in monopolistic competition include restaurants, hair salons, and electronics. What's your favorite restaurant? Why is it? Are there other choices out there that have the same type of food? So why is it that you prefer one over the other? In monopolistic competition, individual firms have to find ways to distinguish their product from similar competing products. Let's say that you chose an Italian restaurant because you love the lasagna they make. While all lasagna is prepared with the same basic ingredients, it's probably that your favorite restaurant uses them in different proportions, or they've added extra ingredients to provide a slightly different taste, or maybe they've altered the preparation resulting in a different product. What would happen if that restaurant raised the price on its lasagna? Is it good enough to keep going back for it, or would you look at going to another restaurant to try out theirs? Firms engaged in monopolistic competition tend to be highly elastic. They don't have the opportunity to raise their prices without seeing a significant decrease in demand, unless, of course, they are branded a luxury good. There are simply too many substitutes available for firms to be able to raise their prices. Because of this, restaurants normally run small profit margins and are highly susceptible to changes in costs. So the first two characteristics of a firm engaged in monopolistic competition are differentiated products and little control over price. How hard is it to break into this type of market? It's actually relatively easy. There are a few barriers to entry because patents and copyrights don't apply, and producers can't act as a cartel to prevent new entries into the market. This also means that in monopolistic competition, there are usually a lot of firms. There may be times when the consumer chooses to buy a good that has many substitutes at a higher price point. Physical characteristics may be a contributing factor. The pen aisle at any store has dozens of different types of pens to choose from, so why buy a more expensive one? Your preference may be for a bold pen over a fine one, gel ink over regular ink, a comfortable grip versus a normal grip. Location can also make a difference. Do you really want to drive to a grocery store that is miles from your home, or another one that is just a minute or two down the road? How about the level of service? If you need to stay at a hotel overnight, some people will opt for the cheaper Motel 6, but others would prefer to have a softer bed, a concierge, and a full breakfast, and then they opt to stay at the Four Seasons. In order to gain attention in such a crowded marketplace, firms rely on advertising to gain attention from consumers. Think about all of those local ads you see on television. Most of those companies are engaged in monopolistic competition and need foot traffic in their stores or awareness of the product they deliver. A detailed and effective marketing strategy are absolutely essential in this marketplace. Competitors will come out with new products or better advertising campaigns. Coke and Pepsi do this all the time.